What happens when Hollywood's most intimidating voice meets The View's most polarizing host? You won't believe what unfolds when Samuel L. Jackson sits down with Joy Behar and the panel for what was supposed to be a lighthearted promotional appearance. This confrontation escalated so fast that producers were scrambling behind the scenes, and by the end, one of cinema's biggest stars was walking off set in a fury that left the studio audience in stunned silence. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two powerhouses clash in the most explosive View confrontation we've ever witnessed. The tension was palpable from the moment Samuel L. Jackson walked onto the View set. What started as promotional banter for his latest project quickly devolved into a heated political battleground that exposed the deep divisions simmering beneath Hollywood's polished surface. The legendary actor, known for his uncompromising persona both on and off screen, came face to face with Joy Behar's notoriously sharp tongue, and the result was television gold that had viewers glued to their screens. The morning began innocently enough. Jackson, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, settled into the guest chair with his characteristic cool demeanor. The View's panel, Joy Behar, Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah Haynes, Alyssa Farah Griffin, and Sunny Hostin, welcomed him with their usual mix of enthusiasm and barely contained chaos. The studio audience erupted in applause as Jackson flashed his million-dollar smile and waved to the crowd. "Samuel L. Jackson, everybody," Whoopi announced with genuine warmth. "Always a pleasure to have you here. You look fantastic as always." "Thank you, Whoopi. Great to be back," Jackson replied, his voice carrying that unmistakable authority that has commanded respect in Hollywood for decades. He seemed relaxed, even playful, as he exchanged pleasantries with the hosts about his upcoming film projects and his recent work with various charitable organizations. The first few minutes proceeded smoothly. Sarah Haynes asked about his fitness routine, eliciting laughs when Jackson joked about his golf game. Sunny Hostin inquired about his thoughts on the current state of cinema, which led to an engaging discussion about representation in Hollywood. The conversation felt natural, comfortable even, with Jackson's trademark wit on full display. But then Joy Behar, never one to shy away from controversy, decided to steer the conversation toward more provocative territory. "Samuel, you've been pretty vocal about politics over the years," Behar began, her tone carrying that familiar edge that regular viewers know signals trouble ahead. "I'm curious about your thoughts on the current political climate. You've been critical of certain political figures in the past." Jackson's expression subtly shifted. The easy smile remained, but his eyes grew more alert, more focused. "I've always believed that artists have a responsibility to speak truth to power, Joy. I don't apologize for having opinions or for using my platform to advocate for what I believe is right." "Right. But don't you think there's a difference between having opinions and being, well, divisive?" Behar pressed, her voice taking on a more confrontational tone. "Some people feel that celebrities should stick to entertaining rather than lecturing the public about politics." The other hosts exchanged glances. Whoopi shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly sensing the direction this was heading. Alyssa Farah Griffin leaned forward slightly, as if preparing to intervene if necessary. Jackson's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Divisive? I think speaking out against injustice is a moral imperative, not divisive." "Are you suggesting that I should remain silent about issues that affect my community, my country?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Behar replied, her voice rising slightly. "I'm asking whether you think your approach is effective. Some would argue that your, let's call it passionate rhetoric, might actually harm the causes you're trying to support." The studio audience began to murmur. This wasn't the playful banter they'd expected from a promotional appearance. Jackson's composure remained intact, but there was something in his posture that suggested he was coiling like a spring. "My passionate rhetoric," Jackson repeated, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Joy, I've spent decades fighting for civil rights, for equality, for justice. I've used my success and my platform to lift up others and to challenge systems of oppression. If that makes some people uncomfortable, so be it." Behar wasn't backing down. But Samuel, don't you think there's a way to advocate for change without being so aggressive about it? I mean, you've made some pretty harsh statements about political figures, about policies. Some might say you're contributing to the polarization in this country. The other hosts were now visibly uncomfortable. Sunny Hostin attempted to redirect the conversation, but Behar continued her line of questioning, with the determination of a prosecutor cross-examining a hostile witness. Aggressive? Jackson's voice dropped to that low, menacing register that had made him famous in countless films. Joy, I'm curious about something. When white actors speak out about politics, are they called aggressive? When they express strong opinions about social issues, are they accused of being divisive? This isn't about race, Samuel. Behar shot back, her own voice rising to match his intensity. This is about the tone of the discourse. We need to be able to have civil conversations about these issues. Civil conversations? Jackson leaned forward in his chair, his eyes never leaving Behar's face. Joy, there's nothing civil about systemic racism. There's nothing civil about voter suppression. There's nothing civil about police brutality. So forgive me if I don't speak in hushed tones about issues that are literally matters of life and death for people who look like me. The studio had gone completely silent except for the low hum of the cameras. The audience was riveted, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Even the usually animated Whoopi seemed frozen, watching the exchange with growing alarm. Behar's face was flushed now, her characteristic confidence wavering slightly in the face of Jackson's intensity. I understand your passion, Samuel, but surely you can see that alienating people isn't the answer. You catch more flies with honey than vinegar. Jackson's laugh was sharp and humorless. Flies with honey? Joy, I'm not trying to catch flies. I'm trying to wake people up to the reality of what's happening in this country. And if that makes some people uncomfortable, if that challenges their comfortable worldview, then maybe that's exactly what needs to happen. The tension in the studio was now suffocating. Producers could be seen gesturing frantically from behind the cameras, clearly debating whether to cut to commercial. The other hosts sat in stunned silence, unsure how to navigate this rapidly escalating confrontation. But Joy Behar, perhaps sensing that she was losing control of the narrative, decided to double down on her criticism. What happened next would transform this from a heated discussion into a full-blown confrontation that would leave everyone in the studio questioning what they had just witnessed. The battle lines were drawn, and neither Jackson nor Behar showed any signs of backing down. The collision course they were on would soon explode into television history, forever changing how people viewed both the legendary actor and the veteran talk show host. The worst was yet to come. What happened in the next few minutes would push both personalities to their absolute breaking points. Joy Behar, emboldened by years of hosting experience and her reputation for fearless confrontation, made the fatal mistake of questioning not just Jackson's methods, but his very credibility as an activist. The legendary actor, who had weathered decades of Hollywood politics and social upheaval, was about to face his most challenging opponent yet, and this time, the cameras were rolling. Samuel, let me ask you something, Behar continued, her voice now carrying a patronizing tone that made several audience members visibly cringe. You talk about fighting for justice and equality, but what have you actually accomplished? I mean, beyond making movies and giving speeches at award shows, what real change have you brought about? The question hung in the air like a lit fuse. Jackson's expression transformed completely. The affable movie star persona vanished, replaced by something far more dangerous. His eyes narrowed to slits, and when he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. What have I accomplished? He repeated slowly, each word dripping with controlled fury. Joy, I've donated millions to civil rights organizations. I've funded scholarships for underprivileged students. I've used my platform to bring attention to issues that mainstream media ignores. But more importantly, I've never forgotten where I came from or who I'm fighting for. Behar waved her hand dismissively, a gesture that would prove to be the spark that ignited the powder keg. Oh, please, Samuel, writing checks isn't activism. Real change comes from building bridges, not burning them down with inflammatory rhetoric. The studio audience gasped audibly. Even the production crew seemed stunned by Behar's dismissive attitude. Whoopi Goldberg finally attempted to intervene, her voice urgent with concern. "Joy, maybe we should." "No, Whoopi," Jackson interrupted, his voice rising for the first time. "Let her finish. I want to hear what Joy Behar thinks real activism looks like." Behar, seemingly oblivious to the dangerous territory she was entering, pressed forward with reckless confidence. "Real activism is about compromise, Samuel. It's about finding common ground. It's about working within the system, not constantly attacking it." Jackson's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Working within the system? Joy, the system is designed to keep people like me in our place. The system told my grandmother she couldn't vote. The system told my parents they couldn't eat at certain restaurants. The system told me I could only play certain types of roles for the first decade of my career." "That was then, Samuel," Behar shot back, her voice growing more strident. "This is now. We've made progress. We have laws. We have institutions. You can't keep fighting yesterday's battles." "Yesterday's battles?" Jackson's voice exploded through the studio, causing several audience members to jump in their seats. "Joy, just last week, a black man was shot by police for reaching for his wallet. Yesterday, voting rights were stripped from millions of Americans. Today, children are being taught that slavery wasn't that bad. These aren't yesterday's battles. They're today's reality." The other hosts sat in stunned silence, watching what was rapidly becoming the most intense confrontation in The View's history. Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Sunny Hostin was shaking her head in disbelief. Alyssa Farah Griffin appeared to be frantically texting, likely communicating with producers about how to handle the situation. But Joy Behar, either too proud or too stubborn to back down, decided to escalate even further. "Samuel, you're being dramatic. You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. Maybe if you approached these issues with a cooler head, people would be more receptive to your message." The words hit Jackson like a physical blow. His face contorted with rage, and for a moment, it seemed like he might actually leave his chair. "My emotions? My emotions are clouding my judgment? Joy, my emotions are what keep me human. My emotions are what connect me to the pain and struggle of my community. What you call drama, I call survival." "But Samuel," Behar persisted, seemingly incapable of reading the room, "don't you think your approach alienates potential allies? Don't you think you'd be more effective if you were less confrontational?" Jackson stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound that echoed through the silent studio. "Confrontational? Joy, I'm confrontational because I refuse to be comfortable with injustice. I'm confrontational because I won't smile and nod while people suffer. I'm confrontational because someone has to be." The studio audience was now completely silent, watching in fascination and horror as one of Hollywood's most respected actors faced off against one of daytime television's most controversial hosts. The tension was so thick it felt like the air itself might shatter. Behar, perhaps finally sensing that she had pushed too far, attempted to regain control. "Samuel, please sit down. We're having a discussion here." "A discussion?" Jackson's voice was now at full volume, his famous intensity unleashed without the safety of a movie script. "Joy, you're not discussing anything. You're lecturing me about how to be black in America. You're telling me how to fight for my people. You're explaining to me what real activism looks like." "I'm not," Behar began, but Jackson cut her off with a gesture that silenced the entire studio. "You're not what, Joy? You're not a white woman telling a black man how to respond to racism? You're not someone who's never experienced discrimination telling someone who has lived it every day of his life how to handle it." The accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Behar's face went pale, and for the first time in the confrontation, she seemed genuinely shaken. "Samuel, that's not fair. I've been fighting for civil rights my entire career." "Fighting for civil rights?" Jackson's voice dropped to that dangerous whisper again. "Joy, you've been talking about civil rights from the safety of your privileged position. You've been commenting on struggles you've never faced, pain you've never felt, battles you've never had to fight. The camera operators were now zooming in on both faces, capturing every nuance of emotion as the confrontation reached its crescendo. Jackson's face was a mask of controlled fury, while Behar looked increasingly desperate to regain control of a situation that had spiraled completely out of her grasp. "I resent that implication," Behar said, her voice wavering slightly. "I've always been an ally to the black community." Jackson's response would prove to be the final straw that would push this confrontation beyond the point of no return. The legendary actor was about to deliver a verbal blow that would leave Joy Behar speechless and set the stage for his dramatic exit from the show. "An ally?" Jackson's voice carried a weight that seemed to press down on everyone in the studio. "Joy, let me tell you something about allies. Allies don't tell you how to feel about your own oppression. Allies don't minimize your experiences. Allies don't lecture you about being too angry when you're fighting for your life." The words hit Behar like a physical force. Her mouth opened as if to respond, but no words came out. For perhaps the first time in her television career, Joy Behar was completely speechless. Jackson wasn't finished. "You want to know what real allyship looks like? It looks like listening instead of talking. It looks like amplifying voices instead of drowning them out. It looks like recognizing that your comfort is not more important than someone else's survival." The studio audience was mesmerized, watching as one of Hollywood's most powerful voices dismantled the host's arguments with surgical precision. Even the production crew had stopped their frantic gesturing, seemingly hypnotized by the raw intensity of the moment. "But you know what, Joy?" Jackson continued, his voice now carrying a tone of bitter disappointment. "I expected this from you. I expected you to reduce my life's work to writing checks. I expected you to tell me I'm too emotional, too confrontational, too angry. Because that's what people like you always do when people like me refuse to stay quiet." Behar finally found her voice, but it was weak, defensive. "Samuel, you're putting words in my mouth. I never said—" "You said everything you needed to say," Jackson interrupted, his voice cutting through her protest like a blade. "You said it when you questioned my credibility. You said it when you dismissed my activism. You said it when you told me to be less confrontational about issues that affect my community's survival." Whoopi Goldberg made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Samuel, Joy, maybe we can all take a breath here and—" "No, Whoopi," Jackson said, his voice suddenly calm, but no less intense. "There's no taking a breath from this. There's no walking this back. Joy has shown everyone exactly who she is today, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise." The camera zoomed in on Behar's face, capturing her growing panic as she realized the gravity of what had just unfolded. Her usual confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "Joy," Jackson continued, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper that had made him famous, "you sit here every day talking about issues you don't understand, affecting people you've never met, fighting battles you've never had to face. And when someone who has lived these experiences tries to tell you the truth, you dismiss them as being too emotional." The silence in the studio was deafening. Even the camera operators seemed to be holding their breath, understanding that they were witnessing television history in the making. Jackson took a step closer to the panel, his imposing presence filling the frame. "Let me make something crystal clear to you and everyone watching. I don't need your approval to fight for my people. I don't need your permission to be angry about injustice. And I certainly don't need your advice on how to be an effective activist." Behar's face was now completely flushed, her hands visibly shaking as she gripped the edge of the table. "Samuel, I think you're misunderstanding." "I'm not misunderstanding anything," Jackson roared, his voice exploding through the studio with such force that several audience members actually flinched. "I understand perfectly. I understand that you think you can lecture me about my own experiences. I understand that you think you know better than I do about fighting racism. I understand that you think my anger is the problem, not the injustice that causes it." The other hosts were now completely frozen, watching helplessly as their colleague was systematically dismantled by one of Hollywood's most formidable presences. Sarah Haynes looked like she was about to cry. Sonny Hostin was staring at the table, seemingly unable to watch. Alyssa Farah Griffin was frantically scribbling notes, probably trying to figure out how to spin this disaster. Jackson's voice dropped again, becoming almost conversational, which somehow made it even more menacing. You know what the real tragedy is, Joy? You had a chance today to listen. You had a chance to learn. You had a chance to be the ally you claimed to be. But instead, you chose to be exactly what you've always been. Another voice trying to silence the very people you claim to support. The accusation hung in the air like a death sentence. Behar's face crumpled, and for a moment, it looked like she might actually break down on live television. "That's not true," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Isn't it?" Jackson's response was immediate and devastating. "Then why did you spend the last 15 minutes telling me I'm too angry, too confrontational, too emotional? Why did you question my methods instead of listening to my message? Why did you make this about my tone instead of the issues I'm trying to address?" The questions hit like hammer blows, each one driving home the point that Behar had revealed something ugly about herself on national television. The studio audience was completely silent now, understanding that they were witnessing the complete destruction of a television host's credibility. Jackson straightened his jacket with deliberate precision, his movements controlled and purposeful. "I came here today to talk about my work, to promote my projects, to have a conversation with people I thought respected me. Instead, I got a lecture from someone who thinks she knows more about being black in America than I do." He turned to face the camera directly, his voice carrying that commanding presence that had made him one of the most respected actors of his generation. "To everyone watching, let me be clear about something. Don't let anyone tell you how to feel about your own oppression. Don't let anyone minimize your experiences. Don't let anyone silence your voice in the name of comfort or civility." The camera caught Behar's face as Jackson delivered his final words, and the image was devastating. Her usual smugness had been completely replaced by something that looked like genuine remorse, but it was too late. The damage had been done. Jackson turned back to the panel one last time, his voice carrying a finality that everyone in the studio could feel. "Joy, I hope you learned something today. I hope you understand that being an ally means more than just saying the right words. It means actually listening when people tell you about their pain." With that, Samuel L. Jackson walked away from the panel, his footsteps echoing through the silent studio. The cameras followed him as he moved toward the exit, his posture straight and dignified despite the chaos he was leaving behind. As he reached the studio door, Jackson paused for just a moment, turning back to look at the panel one final time. The camera captured the devastation on Behar's face, the shock on the other hosts' faces, and the stunned silence of the audience. "Thank you for having me," Jackson said, his voice carrying a bitter irony that sent chills through the studio. "It's been educational." And with that, one of Hollywood's most legendary figures walked out of the View studio, leaving behind a scene of complete chaos and a host whose credibility would never fully recover. The door closed behind him with a soft click that seemed to echo through the stunned silence, marking the end of one of the most explosive confrontations in daytime television history. The cameras lingered on the empty doorway for a moment, before cutting to the shell-shocked faces of the remaining hosts, capturing a moment that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. Joy Behar sat in stunned silence, finally understanding the full weight of what had just transpired, while the other hosts struggled to process what they had just witnessed. In that moment, everyone in the studio understood that they had just seen something unprecedented, a complete and total dismantling of a television host by a guest who refused to be silenced, diminished, or dismissed. The confrontation was over, but its impact would reverberate through the entertainment industry for years to come.